Good morning. This is Tailinh Agoyo on Rise and Thrive, Indigenous Arts, Culture, and Joyful Acts of Resistance. I am here today with Roberto Mukaro Borrero. Is that right, Roberto? Did I get it right? Thank you. I'm so excited to have you joining us today. Roberto has a distinguished background in policy and program development and human rights advocacy, specializing in the rights of Indigenous peoples. He has served on the staff of the International Indian Treaty Council and the American Museum of Natural History. He has also acted as an independent contracting consultant for UNESCO, PBS, and other notable institutions. A published writer, an accomplished artist, and musician, Borrero's unique perspective is informed by his ancestral Taino heritage. Welcome, Roberto. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Hahom. I'll say in my indigenous language, Hahom Itu. Thank you, sister. I really am honored to be here with you and happy to engage in conversation.
Yes, it's wonderful to see you. It's been a while. I think the last time I saw you in person was at We Are the Seeds, Philadelphia, where you were so gracious to bring your family and say an opening prayer at the show for us. And that was our first We Are the Seeds here. So it was a little bitty event, but it was powerful nonetheless. And so that was really wonderful. And then I've just been following all your incredible work online. And it seems like you never have a dull moment and you're always doing things that are completely impactful and incredible, moving this world forward in a positive and beautiful way. So I'd really love to, I'm not even sure where to begin, but I would love to, because you're just so versed in so many things. Why don't we just start with what have you been doing lately?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, gracious introduction. I really appreciate it. And yes, We Are Seeds in Philadelphia was amazing. I mean, it was really, my family enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. It was just a wonderful opportunity to help educate the local community. And the fact that we were in an area that was historically a Puerto Rican enclave, right? That also made an impact because, as you know, being of Taino heritage, it's important to get that message out to youth in urban communities who might not have, whether they have ancestry or not, they should be aware of the indigenous heritage of the region. And so it's really important. And I really thank you for highlighting, being able to highlight that in your fantastic program. And so what have I been doing lately? Like everyone else, trying to navigate the world in the midst of this pandemic. But not only a pandemic, it's a time where we also have seen a rise in authoritarianism politically, a really surge of people who have really racist and derogatory views. But at the same time, we've seen some incredible activism that has elevated voices in ways that we wouldn't have thought possible maybe a few years earlier. And a large part of this, I feel, and I'm sure many others do, have to, we have to link our minds and thoughts with all those folks, who are related to George Floyd, which really sparked a lot of this movement. But I mean, just to give you an example, or to give the listeners an example, that owner of the Washington Redskins said that they would never change the name, and it's been long years of activism by indigenous peoples, North Native American indigenous peoples, who have been in the forefront of that movement. And it was only now, with the backing of large companies like FedEx and Nike and others, who threatened their economic bottom line, that we were able to engage in that shift. So I think that really provides a real important strategy for us to look for, to look at as we move forward, how we impact it. It's not different from strategies that they used back in the 60s when they were boycotting certain stores that were exhibiting racist attitudes, or, engaging in some kind of, action that was really affecting communities of color. And so I think the work that I've been doing lately has kind of morphed into all of this that's going on. As you know, I think the bio might have referred to it. I have done a lot of years of work at the United Nations level uh, for standard setting, human rights standard setting with concern to and for indigenous peoples, right? In other words, we advocate all of our actions, at least in my view, should be based on human rights based approaches, right? How we deal and engage with corporations, how they engage with us. There's a level of human rights that we're all born with, and they're inalienable. And so people have to live up to that standard. And oftentimes we see, and historically we know, that people don't always follow those standards, right? And so I try to continue to make an impact through work in collaboration with the International and Treaty Council and others who are engaged in those arenas. But also, as you mentioned, I also have a cultural background,
Mhm.
and for me, just personally, I feel that highlighting one without really engaging the other
Mhm.
is not really what our ancestors envisioned, right?
Right. It's always interconnected. Right.
Exactly. All these
Mhm.
things are interconnected. So when people say like, I'm not political, when political actions affect our culture,
Right.
I don't know how we can just stand by. Again, that's my view. But so yeah, culture is very important to me. Re, Promoting that culture in a way that is respectful of the feelings of our communities and how we feel. So whether it was through my work at the American Museum of Natural History or just work that I do with groups like the Casibahagua Taino Cultural Society, it's really an effort to promote at least my ancestral culture and add in that grain of salt to everybody else like yourself who is doing amazing work, right?
Thank
And
you.
we all take up
Mhm.
our areas and we all put it in. I mean, it's like all these droplets form that mighty wave, and we can make that change that you were alluding to, right?
Mhm.
in your opening remarks. And so yeah, so been doing some great work. And with the pandemic, it's really a new way to look at things. Although for the last few years I've been doing a lot of work from home as a consultant, um, but this has really ramped up that work, and I feel like I'm behind this kind of screen and computer much more than I ever was. So getting out and supporting uh, Black Lives Matter related protests or demonstrations or rallies is really important. In the midst of all that, we've also raised the visibility of the need to change really racist icons that are promoted in public spaces. I mean, some people call for the removal of Confederate flags. We call
Yes.
for the removal of Columbus
Mhm.
statues and similar tributes to colonizers, right?
Yeah, you spend a great deal of your time on that work, and especially in New York City, where are you living in New York City, or do you live just outside New York City?
Yes, we lived in New York City for quite a while. I'm pretty much a native New Yorker
Okay.
in that sense, but right now we live outside the city, just a little bit outside the city, and it's good for us. We're closer to some of the nearby indigenous nations like the
Mm.
Unkachog and the Shinnecock, and so that's really important to be that close to some indigenous communities that are from these lands. And so I feel really privileged to be here amongst them. And so yeah, but the city is the focus. The UN is there. A lot of our work, racial justice, the interconnection of our movements, a lot of things happen there. So yeah, that's a lot where my focus is. But of course, that's one aspect, and we try to work at the local, national, and international level as well.
Right. So during this pandemic time, you're saying that you're doing a lot of your work behind the screen, but you're also out on the ground at protests and representing. Do you find that people, you've been doing this consulting work, but do you find that during this time there's been a lot more outreach and a lot more understanding of what's necessary, and that people are reaching out to you for your expertise and knowledge and traditional knowledge so that they can to learn more? Do you think it's a better environment? Like, things are building, things are opening up and getting better, and people are listening.
Well, I think it's certainly building. I think there's a lot of advocacy that's going on every level, and yes, many people have reached out, but I still think that there's fundamental differences in the way certain people think about things. As indigenous peoples, at least I know from my Taino culture, our culture traditionally was based on need, not greed, right?
Mhm.
So we had a fundamental understanding also of reciprocity. That's like one of the foundational
Yeah.
elements of our culture, which is why our people were able to expand across the Caribbean and even into the parts of the southern tip of Florida, because we had this idea about reciprocity, what it took, diplomacy, all of these things. And so while many people are reaching out, I think that they're not also thinking that many of our people, whether they're artists or activists, people who made their living from lectures and stuff, yeah, people are calling up, but people are also not thinking that those folks have to be compensated for their
Right.
work
Yes.
and they expect things for free.
Mhm.
And I think that they wouldn't do that to other communities,
Of course.
non communities that are that are not peoples of color, right? They
Right.
wouldn't engage in the same way. It's almost like, oh, but this is some publicity for you or
Or just
promotion.
talk about who you are, but really
Yeah,
you're a professional person and you're a
right,
professional
exactly.
lecturer or performer or consultant.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that that happens to a lot of people,
Yeah.
and whether it's our like whole groups of folks, performance group. Oh, can you share a song? Can you come on? And
Right.
I don't see that we don't have that ability, those interactions for tobacco offerings or different things that our peoples do, across the gamut, to make those connections. And so I just think that there's still education that needs to go on, and
Mhm.
it's opportunities like this that we can raise the awareness, and
Right.
also, I think individually we have to be strong and stand up when people ask us, people from outside our communities ask us, to do these type of things.
Absolutely, because it could turn into being exploitative on a lot of different levels. And I'd really like to explore that when we come back. We're going to take a break. This is Tailin Agoyo on Rise and Thrive on Usala Media. We'll be back in a couple minutes with Roberto Borrero.
Sometimes the things we do are
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Our hearts are made stronger by how we treat others.
Put her there.
The light you share can impact those around you, but so can the darkness.
Later, twerps.
Did Pete saying mean things bother you?
So when you reach out to another person, take a moment to consider how they will feel and let your heart be the key to making a difference. Because of you, someone's entire day, year, or even life can change.
In every heart, there's hope.
Distance on Usala Media. I'm here with Roberto Mukaro. Borrero. Yes! When we left, we were talking about sharing culture and people asking us to share culture, and particularly around like Thanksgiving time is when, it's the most popular time to call us up and ask us to work for free, right? And it's definitely a fine line between educating people and trying to find the balance. And there are obviously some events that we want to give of our time, but at the same time we have families and we do want to share our culture, but we are professional people, and this is how we work. So how do you find the balance when you do get hired to go out into the world, and share culture? And hang 1 second, please. Okay, so how do you find balance when you do go out and share your culture? And yeah, so that would be my question. I apologize. We're having a little bit of, I am having some feedback in my ear, and so.
Yes, no problem.
Yeah, and what do you say to people? And then I have a secondary question to that. Sorry.
No, no
So
problem.
now that I can hear, my secondary question is, you're a Taino person, and I think as many misconceptions as there are about Native people in general, I think people have a lot of misconceptions about Taino people. And so when you are out in the world, how are people receiving you, and what do you give them? So that's a multi-layered question. And then I have another question.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, the balance, it's always hard. It's so tricky, right? Because you want to, I think it's probably in our nature to be generous
Right,
at some point, because
absolutely,
we're acknowledge the generosity of the world, right? This world gives us so much all the
Mhm.
time. She's producing for us. She's with us and all that. So you want to kind of
It's
reflect
true.
that. At least we
Mhm.
try, right? Although the way the world is, sometimes we become jaded and things like that. But if we try to make an effort, so yes, you do um, try to assert as much as you can. Well, maybe there's a thing where somebody will send me something and I'll be like, oh, this sounds great. Is there an honorarium involved, or is this, can you give me the nature? And then, oh, we only have this. I mean, I try to work with people at any level.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
as you said, this is, I mean, people one day will probably look at my taxes or something and and say, oh, well, he didn't really make that much,
Mm.
but we do the best we can, and we try to have a good work ethic. And so it's not about compensation, but as you mentioned, that we're not living in the same ways that our
Right.
ancestors were. We have to make and provide for our families, and at some level, give back to our communities. So
Right.
when it has to do with my community, of course, much of my time is volunteer.
Right.
I, I work with an organization called the United Confederation of Taino People, and
Yes.
we don't take salaries for that work,
Right.
and that could be a full-time job in itself.
Mhm.
Uh, but we try to juggle our time with that, and then with other I guess issues that we're concerned with, also give our time and effort as much as we can.
Because that ties into the reciprocity
Exactly.
um, philosophy, right? But then
Yeah.
if you're outside, and I understand what you're saying, but I think when you are out working, if someone asks you to work, it's not necessarily about the amount of the compensation, but that they value your work as a professional, right?
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. So, and then I think the second part of your question is that as a Taino person, for folks who might be listening and don't even know what we're talking about, everybody knows the nursery rhyme, at least in the United States, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But then they don't know about the community that he actually encountered
Right.
first, and that was the first to really suffer the brunt of that first phase of colonialism and those genocidal practices that impacted our community. We're still reverberating from that impact today, through loss of land, language, an assault on our culture, on our spirituality. And so all those things, the Caribbean is like the first breeding ground of that, right? The first experimentation ground of all these oppressive policies on indigenous peoples. Then they take that out through the hemisphere, and it affects everybody else. So you can imagine those who've only been engaged, over the last 200-300 years, what they've experienced and lost. And then you go back and add another couple of 100 years to that. So you can imagine how impactful it is on our communities. The fact that we have biology that we can prove that links us back to the original peoples of those lands, in particular the Greater Antilles Islands, uh, and the fact that we still can access our ancient language in various ways, and there are many groups like the one I work with that are working on revitalization, and I think that that's important. I think what has been important for me, of course, there's always detractors and, oh, you're not federally recognized under the BIA, but yet we have worked with federal agencies, for example, through the census. We've partnered with them to make people aware of the importance of identifying themselves as Taino, or however they want to
Oh,
be
that's
identified
wonderful.
as Indigenous
Great.
in the U.S. Census. And we've done that. This is the third census that we've worked in partnership
That's
with the Census
incredible.
Bureau. So that's a federal agency.
Yeah,
So when people
important
say
work.
federal recognitions, it's not
Right.
BIA, but we do what we can given the
Mhm.
situation of our colonialism, right? And
Mhm.
Puerto Rico, where my family lineage comes from on both sides, my maternal and paternal side, we call the island Boriquén as Taino. But we're still in a very colonial state, much very similar to a reservation. If you really look at the policies and the impact and what people can do, we were subject to U.S. plenary power on the island, and that's the same thing that any even though you have government to government relationships as North American Indians, um, it's still subject. If you look at the way the Supreme Court looks at these things, it's still subject to plenary power of Congress, right? So, this is why the termination era happened, et cetera. So, there's a lot of similarities there. Other people don't know that when American Indians were being taken to schools like Carlisle Indian
Mhm.
Industrial School, over 50 children from Puerto Rico were taken to that same school,
Yeah.
called, and if you look at the records, it clearly says Puerto Rican Indians, right?
Mhm.
That's the way they were classified. And so there's a lot of understanding. And, finally, I'll wrap up with this. All I could say to folks who, to try to challenge, or that one is that we have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. One of the articles focuses on self determination, and it clearly delineates that it's not up to governments to tell people who is indigenous or not.
Mhm.
It's really us to tell people, and they have to engage us in that way. And so, as a Taino, we were the first ones to be called Indian in this whole hemisphere.
Yeah.
So, the fact that I can't say that I'm American Indian when my
Right.
peoples are indigenous to the Americas, I don't subscribe to that. And I try to focus more on the connection of our peoples across. We weren't immigrants. Our people were traveling back and forth to
Of course.
Florida, so we were here already.
Right.
So they tried to pin that immigration thing, like the other on us. But it's really up to us as educators to highlight that, we have self-determination, we have human rights, and as Indigenous peoples, we have the right to reorganize. Whether our original chiefdoms were decimated through that harsh and brutal, horrific colonization, and the torture that our people were subjected to over generations, right? We have the right to reorganize, as long as we're not pretending to be somebody else, right? As long as we're not saying that we're somebody else, I think that that's what has to be respected.
I think you bring up some really good points, and I'd love if you just go back and briefly talk about, I think maybe a lot of non-native people aren't involved in this conversation, or are very surprised to hear that some native people can't say that they're indigenous or Indian or native legally. If you're doing an art show, you have to have a number or an enrollment card stating that you are government official native person, or you could go to jail, or you could be fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this is meant to protect us, but it also is very hurtful in a lot of ways, because there are a lot of people who do not have the enrollment for various reasons. Colonization is, the primary one, but effects of colonization and ignorance. But, so if you could just touch upon, I think I love what you're saying, like that contrast, like you were the first ones called Indians, and Columbus met you there. Like this story has not been told. Like people don't, this is not part of the myth, right? So just expand on how the government is handling that perspective of who you are. And I love that you say, like, we decide what we are and who we say we are.
Yes, I think that you hit a couple of key points there in your question. One was the mythology, right, that's
Mhm.
surrounding all of this. And the mythology, right, that's backed up now by law is that people who were Europeans or in what was then an emerging Europe came over here and they found empty lands, right? In other words, empty in the way that we were not seen as humans to them,
Right.
and that we were not seen because we had different religion, we had different, whatever however they viewed us, they weren't looking at us as equal,
As people, I mean,
as
meanwhile, there
equals,
were millions of people here.
right? Throughout the whole hemisphere,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so they were looking at this as empty lands. In other words, that they could just be here for the taking, right? And the way the story goes, as I understand it, they were planning to do that to Asian peoples, right? Because they were looking to follow Marco Polo's a route around Marco Polo, what he had set up through the Silk Road, right? And so that's why Columbus went out to find this other trade route so that they can impact. But remember, they were also given a mandate to say that any lands that were filled with heathens or people that weren't following
Yes.
their Christian religion could be taken over and become subject of that religion, of that monarchs, right?
Imagine they were
Yeah.
just like, you could just do what you want.
So that, yeah,
It's
because again,
unbelievable.
it's religious intolerance. So
Right.
how we do that, again, a lot of what I do tries to follow a very um, straight line human rights based focus on everything.
I think
What are the
that's very
standards
smart.
for
Mhm.
human rights? I mean, the
Mhm.
whole reason. Could you imagine in this day that we're participating in right now, the term anti-fascist is seen as derogatory or something wrong with it? What did they go to war in World War II for, which
Mhm.
is supposed to be touted as the great war, the great win, right? Because we
Right.
stamped out fascism.
Right.
And now to be an antifa is like, what happened there? Like,
Right.
how did that get twisted around
Mhm.
into the dialogue? So, this level of mythology, right? So that mythology that I was talking about, impacted American Indian law here in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Because of this idea of the doctrine of discovery. In other words, these explorers came, they discovered these lands, they took possession of them. How? There was no legal possession, they weren't sold, they didn't have a contract, right? But this is why they tried to make treaties afterwards, so there would be some kind of legal quote unquote basis, which we know it was only legal when they needed it to be, or
Yeah.
illegal for their ends, right? Although we still need those treaties are important. My own people had the first treaty in this hemisphere, my own nation, right? And so between Europe and indigenous peoples, that happened in Quisqueya, the Dominican Republic, under Chief Enriquillo, or who we say Guaracuya. But anyway, so that there's this level of mythology that's built into that. So we have to really be, as educators or leaders, at least cognizant of
Yeah.
rights, of that framework, and engage people who are. And I think in the past our leaders did that. People were set up for diplomacy, right? They had to be versed in many things, more than one language, versed at cultures, versed at songs, and I try as an individual to also embody that way of thinking. And so I try to learn as much as I can at every level of my culture, engage, elders, young people, artists, others from other communities to help me in my walk going forward. But we have to be strong and assertive in these ways. And do we get shot down a lot of times? Sometimes, yeah, and sometimes literally, right? Our
Mhm.
people are targeted on many levels, and sometimes that even
Yeah.
leads to assassination of our leaders. Or if they're
Right.
not assassinating you physically, they work on our leaders, through other means to demean and undermine their character, right? So that they're taken out in different ways. So all of this plays into what we have to face as indigenous peoples, just like other communities of color. There's a level of racism that we have to confront, we have to talk about. And whether it's from the island of Boriquén we see the vestiges of that culture when, you look at TV and they highlight only a certain segment of the population that has maybe lighter skin, right? And because there's an ideal, right, that goes behind that this is better, this is the seat of power. If you look like this is the more powerful one, this is the smarter one, right? But it's really up to us and those who are coming after us to challenge those norms and to break down those walls. And so that's again why I'm always so supportive of what you do and other incredible indigenous women and just our leaders overall. I mean, they've had to go through so much, and I've just been fortunate to meet so many incredible people that's afforded me a level of hope, right? That we can persevere at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. I think that you're right. It's just a constant push. It's a constant sharing of knowledge and patience, and but it's that push. And I know that in my own work, I'm always pushing the envelope, with those restrictions or requirements that are placed on us. And I'm like, I think, well, this organization's not going to do that. We're going to find another way around that so that we can recognize Indigenous people for who they are and not play this kind of game that's been imposed upon us. So I appreciate what you're saying, because it just feels like it makes me hopeful, and that you're so dedicated and so forthcoming with your knowledge and not afraid. And I think that maybe in the past, I may have been a little bit more timid about speaking out. But now approaching 50, it's like, I don't care. I'll just say whatever. It doesn't matter.
I hear you.
Right? I'll just say it. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take a break, and I'm really excited because when we come back, we have another special guest that will join us, and it's going to be great to chat about this new event that's coming up. So this is Rise and Thrive on Usla Media. We'll be back in a couple minutes.
Thank you.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Hello, and we're back, and I'm so excited because we have another special guest with us, and Jocelyn Cahiek Borrero happens to be Roberto's partner. Jocelyn is Tlingit. The Tlingit Indigenous peoples' traditional lands run along the Pacific Northwest coast in Alaska, British Columbia, and Yukon, Canada. Jocelyn holds her Master's of Science in Information Technology. She is passionate about supporting Indigenous women in technology. She loves weaving raven's tail, working with cedar bark, and creating intricate beadwork. Jocelyn co-produced a portrait of 100 Indigenous women of Turtle Island, which is part of a larger event 100 years, 100 women. So I want to talk about this. Welcome, Jocelyn. I want to share quickly about this event, and then I'd love to just ask you lots of questions about it. So on August 18th, along with the National Black Theater and 9 other New York institutions, the Park Avenue Armory will unveil 100 commissioned works in video, spoken word, theater, photography, dance, and other art forms by 100 extraordinarily talented women artists and cultural creators, of which you are one. Hi, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us. First, I'd just like to introduce myself in my language. Kahiek yu chat duasauch dachlwedi, or klinket ayachat dachlwedi ayaye chat yeti goch na chat ct. So my name is Jocelyn Kahiek. I'm from the Tlingit Nation. I'm from the Dahlewedi clan, from Tailinh, Yukon, Canada, and I reside currently here on Long Island with my family and my husband. Excuse me. So yes, thank you so much for having
Thank you
us.
for coming on the show.
Yes, I'm excited to be here. So just to talk a little bit about the Park Avenue Armory 100 years, 100 women. Roberto and I had the opportunity to reach out and highlight 100 Indigenous women. And it was really like working through it was very empowering and enlightening, and it was very ceremonial for myself to work through it, to see and feel each unique story from 100 Indigenous women. It's like so just very powerful. So just to step back a little bit, originally we were commissioned to partake in this Centennial celebration. We were in talks in January, February, at the beginning of the year, and our original conversation was that we actually wanted to physically bring in all these women to open up the celebration on Park Avenue in New York City, to have a procession of women entering in and acknowledging the original lands of the Indigenous people in Manhattan, the Lenape, the Ramapo, and have acknowledge the directions, and have the women sing their original songs from each of the directions, have the North represented, the South, the East, the West, and it was just, that was the vision, the original vision. So then, of
Sounds
course,
amazing.
with the pandemic, everything came to a full stop. Yeah. So it was, everything was quiet for a long time, and we were like, I hope we're still gonna do something and work this out. And everybody put heads together, and we talked about it. And so now, next week, August 18th, we have this a virtual watch party to open up the Centennial celebration of the 19th Amendment. And yeah, so we're very excited about that, and I'm very excited to just to see everybody's response and reaction to, and I really feel like I have to say that I feel like this is like a seed being planted. Because I feel like there's so much more opportunity to engage with each individual Indigenous woman that's highlighted here. So I really hope that moving forward, that we'll be able to expand the conversation.
Yeah, it's wonderful that it's a part of this larger event, and there are so many things happening that day. Just so that if everybody, the audience wants to check it out, go to Eventbrite to register. It's called 100 Years, 100 Women. That's what it's listed under. but it's so wonderful that this stands out as 100 Indigenous women. It just seems so powerful and strong. How did you decide? It must have been very difficult because there are so many women just pushing things forward and doing incredible work. It must have been a difficult challenge to pare it down.
How did we? It was, oh gosh.
It was difficult. It was difficult, but it really was a lot of personal connections and things that we resonated with and that we're aware of, and people that we've seen. So it was one way to, Jocelyn and I talked about this, and it was one way to kind of acknowledge. And there's so many other women that could have been there,
right,
as you mentioned. And we tried. Our scope of vision was is who we know and what
Sure.
we know about and who we're connected to. And it doesn't mean that if somebody's not there that they're not worthy of that praise.
Right.
But as Jocelyn mentioned, this was just a start, and and so we hope that it'll be the beginning of a larger conversation.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna, as he was talking, I'm just, remembering things where, it's highlighting Indigenous women. And, the 19th Amendment speaks about, the right for women to vote. And really in that time, the white suffragists really admired the matriarchal, matrilineal Indigenous systems that they already existed, in this separate system from what they're in. This is, they're fighting for their rights, and they're like, oh wow, look at these Indigenous women, they already have what we're fighting for, what we want. So that is like a whole other bigger conversation where, even today, I think a lot of people out there don't understand or don't necessarily know that Indigenous communities are matrilineal, they're matriarchal, and they're Indigenous women are already sit in those powerful seats.
Right. I think this will be a good eye opener. I mean, the Park Avenue Armory is very well known and does incredible work. And so to have you as part of this virtual event, and so it's interesting because you had this physical event that you were planning, but now it's virtual. So it's so much more accessible to people around the globe. So that's kind of the gift after the grieving of, the plans, right? Is that you shift gears and now it's your opportunity to really share all this knowledge with people from all over. But I think what Roberto was saying too about how you were reaching out to your connections or within your perspective. And I think that's really phenomenal also, because a lot of times people get on committees and it's the same people over and over, and they're choosing the same people, and it's always connected to your experience or your connections or who right? So it's nice to have you both as the planning committee for this and share your perspective on who you think is important to highlight. I think that's really important because it's a different type of perspective.
And some of this, if I could just add that, some of these women that we highlighted are very well known, but others are known more at the local level, but they're also heroes, right? So exactly. I think what we tried to convey was that there are so many women who are worthy of praise and should be spotlighted and supported at the local, the national, and international level, which is why we feature women from throughout the Americas in this. Yeah,
it's great. And also there's a lot of times you see a lot of people on social media, and they're really savvy on social media. You think, you kind of get this impression that they're the only ones out there, and there's people who are quietly behind the scenes doing the work. And I know that you're connected with them and that you'll be highlighting them. So I'm really excited to see it. Jocelyn, I know that you didn't want to share much, but is there a way you can do a bit of a sneak peek as to like how it will run? What is, you're already saying like no, but I'm so curious. I mean, is it a slideshow? Is there anything you can share? If you can't, it's okay.
Okay, so I'll say that it's 16 minutes long.
Okay.
And so I had to squish 100 women
Wow.
to a time frame. That's why I said in the beginning that I really felt like it was more of a seed being planted, and I would like to continue working to nourish that seed and water it and hope that it expands and grows into engaging each individual more and have each individual for 15, 16 minutes and not 100 into such a short time. So so that's it's brief, and I really wish that I could have zoomed in a lot more on each individual. So it's the Kasiba Hagua Taino Cultural Society is also highlighted. They participated in singing their beautiful Taino songs in the background, and so it's just talking really a lot about, you know, just celebrating the centennial and highlighting that you know, Native Indigenous women of the Americas were really admired and looked at in that time, 100 years ago, and you know, the the challenges that we face today, you know, the Indigenous women, you know, we still stand strong in our matriarchal power, and we still remain resilient in, you know, continuing to do the work, you know, facing the challenges, facing the struggles, and you know, keep on trudging toward that, you know, brighter future for our children and our great grandchildren to come, you know, to continue with that matrilineal matriarchal power with the support of our patriarchy as well, you know, that there's that balance. It's not just matriarchy, it's not just patriarchy, it's, you know, bringing the masculine and feminine together. And I think that that's really the root and the core of what the white suffragists were really admiring with the Indigenous systems.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very excited about this event. I want to say again, go to Eventbrite for 100 Years, 100 Women. If you'd like to, you have to register, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and is it an all-day event, or is it just a certain amount of hours?
Yeah, it starts at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and I'm really not sure how long. I think that they're just highlighting all the commission artists that participated. And then if you go to the Park Avenue website, I think they have a new website that's going to be put up specifically for this event, 100 Years, 100 Women.
Yeah.
So when you go on there, it's going to be there's links to like everybody. So this specific virtual event, it's going to be, I don't see it being for that long, but we're opening it.
Yeah,
we're opening it. We're at the forefront. So yay!
That's fantastic. It's gorgeous. It's so important, and I'm so happy that they reached out to you to produce this. So it's going to be the opening, the event, and then links to the other 100 artists, women artists. And I think, see, there's a lot of Indigenous artists doing their separate programs. So that's really exciting also.
Yes.
Yeah, this is great. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. So thank you. I think we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but I'd love to talk about like the kids in school and how's everything going, because I'm just curious what your plans are and how it's been. You know, have the kids been home first? Like, did they do virtual learning? And what are your plans for the fall? Because we're just going through the challenge of deciding ourselves.
Oh my goodness, that's oh boy, yeah. Well, our son is 22. He's left the nest. He's been out of the home for the last couple of years. He's living back home in Yukon, Canada, with my family, and he's got his Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. He's doing good.
That's great.
And our daughters here at home, they you know, it's been a real challenge for all of us as a family unit to just support each other in continuing day to day.
Continuing.
Like, yeah, this
Yeah.
pandemic has just been a real challenge. But yes, they're doing the virtual learning, and that we found was a real learning curve for both of them. Just that in itself, having to go to school on the computer, it's so challenging. And then the other biggest thing is that they miss their friends. They miss that social, physical interaction, which I think is really important to, as part of their, yes, a part of their development. And before it was like, get off your phone, get off the YouTube, get off the devices. You got to, spend some like have a real conversation. Why are you going to be texting and stuff like that? And now it's like that's their only way that they can outreach and socialize with their friends. I mean, now that things have lightened up a little bit more, we're able to go out and visit a little bit more, but still like.
I know, right.
Are we hugging yet?
No, just like virtual hug. I'm not virtual, far away hug. Yeah, I guess we're all just trying to navigate this in the best way we can. And there are some light, like there's hope and light, but it is heavy. But you know what? This has been really a beautiful experience, and I'm really grateful that I've been able to do the show and reach out to people every week like you, and having these interesting and interactive conversations have been really wonderful. So thank you so much for spending the time today out of your busy schedule with me here on Rise and Thrive. I really appreciate it. And everybody go on 100 Years, 100 Women and check that out and support, because it's going to be fabulous. Thank you, Roberto and Jocelyn.
Thank you so much for having us.
This is Rise and Thrive on Usla Media. We'll see you next week when we're talking to Danielle Whitaker about all kinds of fun things. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you.